Wasn't sure what to title this video. I might call it photographers in quotations, more the current state of photography, current state of YouTube photography. I don't know. Um, there's been this idea, this this general concept that's been rolling around in my mind for a while, and it seems like it's just progressing. I'm thinking about it more and more often, and it seems more relevant more often. I've alluded to this before. Usually I kind of ramble and I don't say things in a very concise way. I just speak my mind, so it takes as long as it takes for me to finish a thought. But I saw a YouTube video, I think it was by Matt Day, recently posted about is I forget the exact title, but basically talking about is Kodak Gold, the film stock, any good? And for some reason, that was like a light bulb moment, and it these things that I've been kind of alluding to and saying in one way or another, and kind of rambling about for a while, all came together in a pretty concise thought, which is that for a long time, for a majority of the history of photography, film is what people used. It was the only option, and of course, there was, wet plate photography before that, but for a majority of the history, it's been film of one type or another. And a lot of the most influential photographers throughout the history of photography, whether you're a fan of Henry Cartier-Bresson, or you're a fan of Steve McCurry, or you're a fan of really anybody. I mean, it doesn't matter if they did portraiture or landscape, or if they were a photojournalist, or if they were a fashion photographer, or just a regular journalist, somebody on the street recording what they saw in the world, recording important events on our streets that we walk on. It didn't really matter. The idea was that you had to use film. That was the one universal truth. And different photographers would use different cameras, either based on budgetary concerns or based on what was easily available, or depending on the line of work, you might get a camera specifically because it's very cheap and easy to replace, and you expect there's a high likelihood it'll get broken. So the camera is kind of viewed as being potentially disposable. But aside from those specific use cases, in a perfect world, we would assume that you choose the camera based on a few basic things, like you prefer this camera system because of the lens mount. Maybe you liked the Pentax, or the K mount, or you liked the old Canon FD or later EF mount, or the Nikon F mount, or um, there was Minolta. There was, of course, if you shot medium format and this and that, there was even more options, and or there's also always been the Leica crowd. Um, but even within those lens mounts, that was the first thing: is which lenses do you want to use? Might be a consideration, or maybe it's an afterthought. The other thing might be just portability. Some people would choose a medium or large format camera. Didn't matter that it wasn't very portable. They required that. They wanted the ultimate in image quality, so they needed that larger piece of film. Whereas the majority of other photographers, they prioritize portability. So if you can hold it, if you can put it in a bag, if it's easy to carry around and use, then that was the priority. And that seemed to be across any type of photography, with few exceptions. It was typically more important that it's portable. Um, but you can get into any of the specs, whether it's the brand of the camera that you like, or it's the lens mounts, or it's the portability factor of the specific camera, or maybe you need a camera that has a built-in light meter, or maybe you need a camera that has a certain shutter speed. Which back in the day, those old film cameras, the shutter speeds actually weren't very fast. It was very, very common on an old film camera. It might not go above 1/500th of a second. Sometimes as they got better, and the mechanisms for shutters became more reliable, you would see old film cameras, like manual film cameras, with a 1/2000th shutter. But whatever it was, you chose your camera and then that was it. You might upgrade your camera or you might replace it, but really what was at the heart of your image, like the camera was the tool that helped you capture the image, but what was at the heart of the image, what gave you the colors that you were looking for, or even the black and white aspect if you shot black and white, what gave you the image quality, all of the aspects that we now think about as a priority with photography, really came down to the film that you used. Every film stock rendered in its own way, whether it was, again, a negative film or if it was a slide film, if it was large format or medium format or 35 millimeter, or if it was half frame. What was the ISO of the film? And then after all those things, for absolute image quality, it just came down to things like, are you choosing Kodak Gold or are you choosing anything else? I'm suddenly drawing a blank on some of the most popular color films for everyday people, but it was very common, even among photographers. Again, they didn't have this concept of always changing it up. They had the idea of, depending on what kind of photography you did, you'd either find that one film stock that you liked, that was the look that you appreciated, that was the quality that you wanted, and then that was all you shot. That was just all you used forever. You didn't even use other ones. It didn't matter. This was the film stock, and it was part of your look, is the way that this film renders things. And other photographers were a little more flexible, depending on what they were shooting or what the assignment was. They might switch it up, but even then they had a pretty small, narrow selection. If they're going to do black and white, they're going to choose this. If they're going to do something in low light, they're going to choose this. If they're going to use color, it's this. Or even in the color, they might say, okay, well, if I'm doing general photojournalism type of stuff, like out and about shooting, I'm going to use this color film. But if I'm doing a portrait shoot specifically, I'm actually going to switch it to this other one because that's better for portraits. But even then, they kind of chose the camera, they chose the system they wanted, the camera they liked, and then they had the one or maybe small handful of films they chose between, and then that was it. They built an entire career off of that. I know I'm sounding like a broken record because I've talked about these things before, but I have a whole stack of photography books over there specifically, by specific photographers, just like their lifetime work or specific assignments they did or conceptual stuff with photography. And so often I see like very specific photographers who are known. For example, Steve McCurry, he was known for Kodachrome. That was his thing. He shot Kodachrome. Kodachrome 64. That was it. Now, even with Kodachrome, there were other ones. There was Kodachrome 25 and whatever else, but he shot Kodachrome 64. That was his thing. That was part of his look. That's the one he was comfortable with. That's what he knew how to work within the confines of, and that's the one that gave him the results he wanted. So he used Kodachrome 64, the end. He's also a Nikon photographer. Now, I think he shot an FE2 or an EM2 or whatever it was. Those nomenclatures of those cameras get kind of lost in my mind, but he had a few lenses. He were like his go-to lenses. But even with his cameras, for a lot of his career, he didn't use the most high-end, like he didn't use the F3T. He didn't use the F4, the big professional SLRs. He used some cheaper ones that might have an electronic feature that the pro ones didn't have, or again, it was cheaper because he knew it might break in travel. But he basically had his camera set up, and that was it. He might upgrade a camera here and there every once in a while, but this was his camera setup, and Kodachrome 64, this was his film, and that's how he built his career. The end. There are other guys. There's a really famous street photographer, actually, who did it well into really old age. I'm suddenly forgetting his name, but he shot Leica. That's just what he always shot. He had an old Leica rangefinder, maybe an M3 or something, I forget. But he had that camera and maybe one or two lenses, like a small, just very few lenses. And that was set. Like at some point in his life, he got that camera, and that was it. That was intuitive. It felt right. The controls were right. The quality was right. He understood how to use it. He became comfortable with it. So then there's no reason to upgrade. There's no reason to change. It does exactly what he wants it to do. And he could change the image quality to an extent by swapping out the film, and that was how it went. And today, it's a digital world. And I'm not I have a lot of cameras. I appreciate the engineering behind cameras, and I appreciate all the different varieties. It's part of. It's like when my mom was growing up, she used to say, well, when I was growing up, my mom used to say, and I guess she said it when she was growing up too, but she used to say that the variety in the world is what gives the world beauty. It's what makes the world beautiful. She doesn't want everybody to be the same. She doesn't want everybody to dress the same way or listen to the same music or have the same opinions. It's the variety. Whether you end up liking someone's style or not, whether you like the music they listen to or not, it's this variety in every aspect of life that gives the world beauty. Is this the variety? So I think the fact that we have so many cameras to choose from and there's such a wild variety is a good thing. It's awesome. It's cool. People can find exactly what they want. But there's been it's a weird mix of people getting that gear acquisition syndrome where they feel like they have to upgrade. They start feeling they fall for the marketing and they give into the YouTube videos, and every single YouTuber on YouTube always buying the newest camera, always reviewing the newest thing, and always saying this is why I upgraded. And it's no coincidence that every single YouTuber will talk about how this new expensive camera is their new camera. They're switching to this. This is exactly what they've always wanted, and they'll tell you all the reasons why it's the best camera ever, and everybody should own it, and they are definitely going to own it. Even if you don't, well, they're going to, because they know how good it is. And then a month later, maybe 2 weeks later, there's a different video. Why I switched. Why I got rid of. And it's a video about how they don't use it anymore. They switched to a different new camera. None of it's genuine. Either what I feel most of the time is true is that they're not being genuine with you. They're not being honest. They're trying to sell you gear because they get a kickback or they get clicks. Photography, like camera reviews are very, very popular. Or they are just as confused and clueless as the random amateur who's watching their video. They don't know, and they might, from a fundamental, like a technical aspect, they might understand the concepts of crop factors and apertures better than the amateur, but they could potentially be just as confused and lost as anybody else, which is why they themselves can't help but to switch cameras every 2 weeks. In which case, you don't want that to be your financial guide or your artistic guide for how you spend your money or how you express yourself or the tool that you use to do your job. So that aside, there's also a high level of insecurity these days, of people legitimately. It's weird how on a subconscious level, as people, we've changed. Humans, again, as a species, we used to have this kind of collective subconscious concept that that quality is what mattered. It was the idea of, hey, if you buy cheap, you buy twice. You buy once, you cry once. This something that's a good quality. It might cost more, but you appreciate what it's made of. You appreciate the material choices. You appreciate the country in which it was made because that represented something. You appreciated it for what it was, and then you expected that if you could ever afford it, if you could bring yourself to purchase this more expensive option, it would be worth it in the long run. It would save you money in the long run. It would not only perform better and do its job better and serve you better, but it would last your whole life. You could have it forever. Whether it's that old photographer's Leica that he had his entire career, his entire life, or it's the old refrigerator Back in the day, these refrigerators that were made anywhere, but let's say the old Made in USA, Whirlpool, whatever, or Maytag refrigerators that just never stopped. They just kept going. There was that meme that I saw. What was it? It's basically saying how like these new refrigerators, as an example, they break after 2 or 3 years and they cost as much as a car and everything else. But then you've got that old refrigerator from the 80s that's in your garage, and it will outlive all of us. It's going to outlive the sun. The thing's never going to stop. So people used to have this inherent concept of good quality, and part of the reason why you wanted to spend extra money and why you were willing to part with that extra money to buy this higher quality thing was because it gave you more use. It would work better and it would last longer. You would never have to buy that thing again. That's the refrigerator. Now I most likely don't have to buy another refrigerator. Or hey, that's the couch that I bought. That's the couch I'm going to have for good. That's my new forever couch. I don't have to worry about that problem anymore. Same with cameras. Photographers used to choose cameras and lenses based on what they could potentially just, this is just their new camera forever. Now, eventually down the road, years or decades later, they might upgrade out of necessity or whatever else. But for the most part, you could actually keep the camera forever. I've got, it's in the United States with my mom right now, but her grandfather, my great grandfather, Grandpa Doyle, he was a photographer, professional photographer, way back in his day, and he did everything, ad campaigns for the telephone company to portrait stuff to whatever else, and he shot with Raleighs, he shot with, I think he had Hasselblad stuff, like he had some really high end stuff, but he also had some smaller 35 millimeter cameras, like he had an old Miranda SLR, and not only did all that stuff last forever, but now here it is, like years, decades after he's passed, and those cameras are still around. My mom has his old Miranda camera, and it still works. When my mom was going through college, she went to Heron School of Art in Indianapolis for her degree in fine arts, and there was a whole course they did on photography, and that was the camera she used, was her grandpa's old Miranda camera that still worked perfect. And when I went back to visit the States a few years back, and I was at her house, I saw that camera and I picked it up and I noticed it worked. So I loaded it with film and I started using it. And it was great. So that used to be the mentality, is you buy once, you cry once. You get the thing you need and then you're set. And now at a fundamental level, we've switched to this concept of never being satisfied, of always needing to upgrade, of what's the next best thing. And that has run its course into its natural evolution of the subscription model. I saw a video recently by Camera Sutra, the Camera Sutra 247 channel. I've watched his videos on and off for years. He didn't upload for a while and I lost track of his channel and I found it again. But he recently did a video where he's talking about Canon is going to start having a subscription service. And it seemed like he was more or less on the side of, hey, that's a good thing because they can basically turn on extra features. And if you don't need it, they can turn it off. And I had a fundamental problem with that because, well, one, from a technological standpoint, what he was saying didn't quite make sense. I don't think he understands the technology aspect. But from a financial standpoint, from a consumer standpoint, it's a bad direction. So Lightroom is a great example. I use Lightroom. I like Lightroom. I have tried probably every photo editing software out there. I always revert back to Lightroom. Sometimes it's popular, sometimes people hate on it, but it's a good service. It's a good program. It works well. I'm comfortable with it. And I pay the subscription. I used to have a dedicated standalone Lightroom, but the thing is that eventually that got old enough that I realized that, man, if I just get this new subscription one, which I initially didn't like the idea of, it's going to support all my new cameras. It can have all these new features. It's going to do all this new stuff that actually is legitimately helpful. So eventually I got the subscription, and I've had it for years now. and I've never regretted it. I forget what I actually pay. I have to check the bill. Maybe it's $15 a month. I think their pricing for what they offer is probably a little bit different depending on what country you're in. I think I pay $15 a month, but the way I view it is for $15 a month, it means I don't have to pay what I used to pay, which was like $600. Just slap down $600 to buy the Lightroom program. Don't have to pay $600 up front. And then when you used to do that, once I bought the program, yeah, now I have it and I have full access, but it's never going to be updated. It's always going to be the old Lightroom program. It's almost immediately, especially in today's world, would be almost immediately outdated. So the idea of paying $600 for a program that's almost immediately outdated, or the idea that I might have to, like a phone, for example, I might have to pay $600 every 2 years to upgrade to the newer version, every year or every 2 years, financially it doesn't work out very well. Because if I'm paying $600 every year or every 2 years, that comes out to being more than the $15 a month I'm paying for the service. But with the benefit with the subscription model is that, well, I don't have to pay all this money up front over and over again. And it also means that it automatically updates. Even when I don't know about a new feature they have, they'll just automatically update it for me. This new AI thing, this new this. I can't tell you how many years I spent painstakingly with a little mouse, very tightly going back and forth trying to hand paint every tiny little detail, to mask something. So I'm hand masking something, and I'm having to make sure it doesn't spill over too much. Oh, if it spills over at all, I'm going to see the difference. And if it doesn't go quite to the edge, I'm going to see the difference. And it was such a drawn out, labor intensive, just annoying process to edit photos. Like when you had to mask a specific thing because you had to do it by hand. And that's one of the great innovations of the AI, is that I can now just click select subject, and usually it selects the correct subject and it masks it perfectly. Or I can go select people, and then I can even specify which person do you want to select. I want to select this one. Do you want to mask the entire person, or just their hair, or just the facial skin, or just their lips or teeth, whatever else? It makes the editing process so much more intuitive and quick and fast and easy, and it lets me spend more time on my life. It saves me actual time, which is more valuable to me than anything else. So the fact that I'm always having these updates and upgrades all the time, plus I get cloud storage. So if I'm editing something on my computer, I can open the app on my phone, and now it's on my phone, or vice versa. I can start editing on my phone and then finish it on my computer. I get all these services constantly updated and constantly improved all the time for $15 a month. Like, to me, that's worth it. But the Camera Sutra channel, he used the example of the BMW, how you have to pay a monthly subscription to turn the the seat heaters on. And that drove me crazy because I have a background in automotive. It's like when you see the movies where someone rips the wires out from under the dash and they just start sparking wires together, and the camera, or not the camera, the car just magically fires up. Always drives me crazy. Drives my dad crazy. My dad's been a mechanic for over 50 years. Because that's just not how it works. Not only can you not just spark wires together and then suddenly the steering column is unlocked. Suddenly the fuel injector system, like the fuel pump, turns on, and the injectors start this and this. Like, there are so many things that must be turned on and go through their processes in a car, especially a modern car with a computer, that just sparking some wires would never initiate all those processes in the correct way. But past that is the simple fact that that's a lot of wires. Some of them are positive, some of them are negative. Some of them are meant to have constant power, some of them are meant to have temporary power. And by sparking these wires together, there's a very good chance that you're going to end up sending a hot lead up a ground wire somewhere you're not supposed to send it, and you're going to fry the computer. There goes the ghost, Now the car's never going to run again. Or you're going to catch it on fire or something. Or you rip those wires out, and you maybe get this one magical wire, but because you ripped out all the other wires, now nothing else in the car works because the lines have been severed. So this idea or and again, separate example in movies. I think it was Terminator 3, where the woman Terminator, she was able to, through uplinking, was able to control the police cars, and again drove me crazy. Like there's physically there's no way that could work ever. Doesn't matter how good technology gets in the future coming back. Like if there's not an electric motor attached to the steering system, for example, like an actual electric steering system, then there's no way that it can be manipulated via firmware or software or anything else. It's a mechanical linkage, it's analog system. It requires someone to physically grab the wheel and turn it. It's the same with these cars in terms of that BMW seat heater. No amount of ones and zeros, no amount of future technology is going to make you be able to turn the seat heaters on in a car if the physical hardware for heating the seat is not there. It's the same with air conditioning. You can't turn air conditioning on and off unless you have an air conditioning compressor, unless the hardware is there. Same with power windows. Unless there's an actual motor in the door and a switch to turn it on and off, you're not going to have power windows. So it used to be this idea that you could save money on a new car by buying a base model, manual transmission, no power options, just hand crank windows, physical, manual locks. Maybe it didn't even have power steering. Maybe if we're going back old enough, no air conditioning, no fuel injection, still carbureted. Like you could get the most stripped down basic version of a car, drum brakes instead of disc, and that would save you a lot of money. And the reason why it saved you money wasn't because of a wink wink deal you had with the company, but it was because by not putting those things in the car, the company was able to produce the car for a lower price. It cost the company less to make the car. And because it cost them less to make the car, they don't have to charge you as much for it. They can afford to sell it to you for a lower price. And that's the appeal. You want to buy it because it costs less. And they are willing to sell it to you for less because they're still making a profit. And if you wanted these extra features, like, well, actually, you know what? I want disc brakes. I want power steering. I want an automatic transmission and power windows and power locks. I want air conditioning. The company was happy to sell you that car. But by adding all that physical hardware, by adding all that extra stuff into the car, it's costing them more. Not only because of the stuff they have to produce to put in the car, but then the actual labor involved, the additional time on the assembly line, the additional workers that they have to pay to install that stuff and test it and everything else. Like it costs the company more to produce that car. So if you want it, you're going to have to pay even more in order so that they can still make a profit, right? Now, why are you motivated to pay extra, so much more for the same car? Well, because it has all this extra stuff that the cheaper one doesn't have. So it works both directions. This car doesn't have as much, but it's cheaper. Company still makes money, you get to save money. This car has more stuff, but it's more expensive. You have to pay more money. And the company charges more money because it costs them more money. In the BMW example, the problem is that in order to have seat heaters that you can turn on and off, it means they have to add the hardware into the seats. So they already are spending the extra money in the production, in the assembly and the manufacture of that car. You are then paying extra for that car. They're not going to put, like, let's just say, for example, and these are drastically incorrect numbers, but it's for the sake of demonstration. If they make a car that was totally stock, like it was base model, had no additional features in it, and it cost them $10,000 to make, and they could sell it to you for $15,000. So they made a 50% profit. Cool. Or they could put all this extra stuff in the car, all these bells and whistles, but it's going to cost them $20,000. It's going to cost them twice as much to make that car. So now they're going to sell it to you for maybe 25 or 30. So either they're making the same $5,000 profit, but it's a smaller percentage, or they still want to make a 50% profit, so they're selling it for 30,000 instead of 15. It costs them twice as much to produce, they're going to sell it to you for twice the price. There is never a circumstance where any business is going to spend the money. They're going to spend $20,000 to produce a car. But then because all those features are turned off until you pay the subscription, well, because they're turned off right now, we'll sell it to you as if it's a base model car for only $15,000. They're not going to sell you a car at a loss. If it costs them $20,000 to produce because it has the hardware in it, they're not going to sell it to you for $15,000 because the option is that you can keep the stuff turned off. They're still going to sell it to you for the $25,000. So when you buy the BMW, for example, that has all these things put in it, like the seat heaters, you are paying extra for that car. Dead stop. That's just how business works. So you have already paid extra for this car. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter how much you paid for it, whether it's above sticker, below sticker, doesn't matter. Once you've purchased that car, it's yours. You own it. You own that car. You purchased it. You purchased every single gasket, every seal, every nut, bolt, piece of plastic, piece of metal, every thread from the fabric. You own that car in its entirety, which means you have also paid for, purchased, and own the seat heaters. So for them to retroactively go back and say, we're going to remotely disable those so that they don't work unless you pay us extra, that's akin to like a ransom, basically. That's saying that you paid for this thing, you paid for this hardware that does this job, and now after paying and after you own it, we're going to remotely prevent you from using it unless you pay extra. That's wrong on so many levels. And seems somewhat dystopian if you think about it too much. And if you're not sure where the lines are legally or morally, think about the Apple situation. Apple is a company, they make the iPhone, they make Macs and everything else. They, for many, many years, everybody suspected, people loved the iPhone, but they suspected that Apple, with their software updates, were making the old, outdated iPhones run slower and slower. Performance was dropping. There was so much anecdotal evidence for it. People were basically sure. Unless you were a super hardcore Apple fan and you just blindly believed everything they said, people just generally believed and accepted, like, yeah, pretty sure that they're making these old phones run slower, with the idea that, yeah, the old phone still works, but you'll be even more tempted to buy the newest iPhone if the old one is not working as well. And the longer you wait to upgrade, the more iterations, the more generations of new phone you pass up, the slower and crappier your old phone's going to get, to the point where it feels like it's nearly unusable, and you're going to feel like you have no choice but just go buy a new one so that certain apps work the correct way, so that whatever. And Apple always denied this outright. Absolutely, we would never do that. That would be wrong. Why would we want to do that? We want to make our customers happy. We would never, never, never. For years, they denied remotely, through software updates, slowing phones down for any reason at all. Why would they do that? And then it was finally proven. Somebody was able, I forget now how they proved it, whether they were able to decipher some of the code or if they were able to do something, but in the end, they got busted. They were able to prove definitively that Apple was, in fact, slowing down old phones via software updates. Once they proved it, this turned into a huge lawsuit. It was a lawsuit because it's illegal. You can't do that. And Apple's defense, to save face, was, oh, well, we were trying to help you by slowing your phone down. See, the batteries are getting older, and because the batteries are getting older and they're aging, we're slowing down your processor and slowing down your phone so that it's less demanding on the battery and your battery will last longer, which it's not really how it works. I mean, if you look at the problem from a certain angle and a certain light and you ignore the potential issues, you might say that could theoretically work, but there are too many factors to take into consideration, and at the end of the day, it's like that doesn't make any sense. So, okay, they tried to save face with an excuse, which is strange because if they were doing it to help users from the start, you think they would have just admitted it and just said, oh yeah, we do that, but here's the great reason why we're doing it, to help you. But they always denied it because they knew it would be wrong and there was no good excuse to do it. And they got caught, they got busted, and they tried to save Facebook. Oh, but we did it because of this good reason. But the courts still ruled that they have to add a feature to turn that off. In the system menu, you have to be able to go through and turn that optimization off so that your phone works the way it's supposed to. Ooh, bummer, right? A company cannot remotely start to modify or change or disable or negatively impact the performance of something you already own. That's illegal. You can't do that. But that's kind of what's happening with the BMW thing. And it's the same with this Canon subscription service. The bottom line is that a camera cannot do anything unless it has the physical hardware that makes it capable of doing those things. And if a camera has all this high-end professional grade hardware in it so they can do all these high-end amazing things, then you are going to pay extra for that camera. The end. You're not going to pay entry level budget camera price for what is potentially a full-on professional camera because certain things are turned off. Like that's not how companies work. It's not how businesses work, especially in this day of everything from magic lantern to everything else where people can learn how to get around certain things. I mean, Canon, as an example, already tried to mess up the 8K recording feature on, I think it was the R5 or something, and people just through hacking the system found out how to get around that. So Canon had claimed that there was a physical hard limitation, and it turned out it wasn't. It was artificially imposed, and people were able to hack it themselves to get around it. So in this case, they're not going to sell you a full-on, like a potentially full-on professional camera made of all the best materials, full of all the best hardware for a budget price. You're still going to pay full price for the camera. But to then, after you've paid for it and after you own it, to go back and say, but now we're going to turn the features off. If you actually want to use any of that stuff that you paid for, now you're going to have to pay extra. It feels very reminiscent of the Apple thing. It's just wrong morally. And the other thing is that there's only so much you can do with that hardware. That was part of the things I said Camera Sutra doesn't seem to understand. I was reading a lot of his comments, a lot of his replies to other people, and he doesn't seem to understand that very basic concept that there's a limitation to what technology can do at any given time. The reason why modern computers, for example, are so much more capable than old computers is because the technology is improved. Processors are faster. RAM is faster. Things are cheaper. Storage is cheaper. Like everything, like graphics abilities have gone through the roof. Like everything has just skyrocketed as far as the price coming down for performance, but also what your maximum performance potentially is. So if you try to run some of this AI based stuff that requires a really good processor, for example, on a Windows laptop from 2003, it's not going to work. No matter what firmware you put in, like it's the hardware is physically not capable of supporting that stuff. And it'd be the same with cameras. It doesn't matter what sort of ones and zeros, what firmware, software. It doesn't matter what kind of hacks you do. You might be able to squeeze a little bit here, squeeze a little bit there, but you're gonna reach a point where eventually there is some new, updated, amazing feature, whether it's the newest, most blazing fast, perfect, flawless autofocus, tracking and acquisition and everything else, or it's higher bit rates and higher frame rates and higher resolutions for video, or it's whatever it is. There's going to be things that are only possible because of new hardware. And no amount of firmware updates are going to make old, outdated hardware capable of this new stuff. Which means if you want that stuff, you're still going to have to buy the new hardware. So, yeah, I don't see this the Canon firmware, like the subscription service, based on how it's being described, is at all okay or possible. And it also doesn't mean that you can just keep the same camera. Like the old days, you can't just now keep the same camera for the rest of your life, but always have modern features because the hardware itself will become outdated. So it's crazy to me that I still get comments on my 5D classic videos where people think that the camera is just unacceptable. And ironically, they still talk about how the dynamic range isn't enough. I still see in every other video, in every comment section, people talking about, is this camera still capable? How is this camera in 2024? And it blows my mind because it's just as capable as it ever was. It's just as professional as it ever was. If you're looking for a specific tech spec, if you need a camera that can record 8K, then no, a 6D is not for you because a 6D can't record 8K. But as far as in its own right, how does it function as a camera? Does it take good photos? Like, yes, absolutely. With any of these cameras. I saw another guy, a YouTube photographer, talking about why he uses an old camera. And I forget the title of the video, but he's talking about his old ancient camera. It's how he's basically I'm not trying to speak badly about him, but I forget the exact wording he used because it's been a few months since I've seen this, but essentially the idea is that he's somewhat of a throwback photographer. He's a bit of a philosopher because he doesn't need the newest and greatest gear. He is capable of taking good photos with old, outdated, ancient stuff. I mean, he still uses a Sony A7 Mark III, and it just blew my mind. Like, I so clearly remember watching YouTube videos, watching Jason Lanier, for example, talk about the brand new A7 Mark III and its insane low light performance and all these great specs. And it was the one of the most sought after cameras in the world. And that was so recent. It was just a few years ago, and now it's considered this old, ancient, outdated thing that you're a bit of a poet if you can manage to use that as a photographer. It's just crazy to me. Just the way the mentality and the view has changed. There's nothing wrong with new gear, as I've said many times. New gear is great, but I don't know. I'm repeating myself at this point. And on that topic again of YouTube photography, of photographers on YouTube, I posted some stories and I've posted some comments and I've made some videos talking about the old days of YouTube photography, the early days of YouTube photography, and how so many of the most popular YouTube photographers from before are either not around, like they just disappeared, or they're still around but they're doing totally different things. They've had to totally change their format to hopefully stay relevant. And I find myself thinking about that. Like, I love the old digital rev videos. The cheap camera challenge is my favorite. And Kai and Locke still make videos, but they just don't feel the same. Obviously they're not with digital rev anymore, but that was like, oh, it's a bummer, And I think about Darren Miles. Darren Miles didn't almost never uploads anymore. And now he finally did a video where he's saying, oh, the new update with this channel, and he's just going to talk about lighting, which isn't inherently bad, except it's a very niche, like, which speed light should you use? And those are going to be the videos he focuses on, and that's kind of a bummer. I liked when he talked about doing professional real estate photography with Micro Four Thirds, where he talks about some lens comparisons, like, hey, because he was a real estate photographer, if you're doing interior shots, really wide angle, these are the two really popular wide angle zooms, so I'm just going to compare them to see which one's actually better. I'll tell you my thoughts on it. This stuff was interesting. You had guys like the Angry Photographer, which I have a personal history with him. I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt for a long time, and we've exchanged messages and we've talked a little bit, and in the end I just had to kind of ghost him and stop speaking to him because I'm not trying to get into drama, but if I'm being totally honest, the guy he really is, I think there's something wrong with him. And I don't mean that in the way that he professes and he tries to get pity by always talking about how hard his life has been. I mean, I think he's actually a very manipulative person. And I think that I think he's not nearly as much of an expert on most things as he professes to be, which has been proven time and time again. It's a whole different story. There have been so many times when he'll talk about field theory and he gets proven wrong, and then he just removes his videos. And if anyone comments like, hey, didn't you say this, he'll remove them from the channel. Same with photography. There was this hilarious example I remember when he just had this weird thing where he was always going after Jason Lanier and Sony specifically. And Jason Lanier had made a video saying how he liked the fact that the Sony had a flip down screen, because if he needed to do an overhead shot, he could just flip the screen down and he could actually frame it like that. And Ken Wheeler's big gotcha was like, why do you need that stupid feature? You can just use a ladder. And Jason Lanier had this perfect response of, he set up a camera in his garage, I think it was, if I remember correctly. He said, okay, let's see how easy that is. And he grabbed his Sony and he put it overhead and he flipped the screen down. Like, okay, that was one method. And then he put the Sony away, and then he grabbed one of his old Nikons and he put it down. He left the frame, he got a ladder, he brought it back, he set the ladder up, he grabbed his camera, he shuffled his way up the ladder. He tried to get up there and view. And then he took that photo, then he climbed back down and he did this and he put the ladder away and he said, now which one do you think was easier? And because of that video that was so perfectly done, that just demonstrated the absurdity of what Ken was saying. Ken deleted his original video where he said that stuff about the ladder, and anybody who mentioned it got silenced. And now, of course, his whole thing was, I'm making a website dedicated to this to send me money, and the website never came, and he was taking credit for other people's photos, which he got busted for. And then he did the whole, well, technically I never said they were mine, that semantics game. And now he talks about who knows what, but he bashes people and he's a negative guy, and his channel seems like it's kind of dead. He's had the same subscribers he used to, but his videos get almost no views. So that's what's happening with him. And then on that subject of Jason Lanier, he was getting very popular. And then suddenly there was some accusations against him, which initially I had an old video where I said, I was being very outright and saying, like, I don't know what happened, but the fact that so many women who have worked closely with him are all coming out together and making similar accusations makes it seem like, it's no smoke without fire. Like, I don't know if what they said is specifically true. I'm not making judgments on that. So I felt confident that he must have done something wrong, except what was strange was that then that We Stand Together channel they created was removed, and all their individual videos accusing him were removed. And people, Ken Wheeler was talking about how the FBI was involved, and then nothing ever came from that. And there's a whole, I don't remember all the details precisely, so I'm not going to get into all that, but essentially what it ended up coming down to was, as bad as it looked for Jason Lanier initially, in the end, it actually kind of seemed like, when everything all came out in the end, it seemed like it might have actually been a case of maybe someone was trying to manipulate him or screw him over or blackmail him or something like it. It didn't seem like he actually did anything. And I was curious whatever happened with him. So I actually found his channel, I found his email, I sent him an email recently, and I asked if I could interview him. And I told him ahead of time, I know you're probably not going to read this, you get a lot of emails, it might go to your spam. And I'll tell you up front, you might recognize my name. I am a guy who made a video about your old situation, and shockingly enough, I didn't think anybody'd see it because my channel was really small at that time, but it got a lot of traction. It got tens of thousands of views, and it was being shared in like photography news sites. And Ken Wheeler reached out to me and tried to manipulate me into saying and doing certain things to screw over Jason, in which case, like, at the end, I was just like, this is ridiculous, and I just took the video down. But I told him, like, yes, I am that guy, if the name seems familiar, so we're on the same page. But I basically said, I, and I assume other people as well, are kind of curious whatever happened to him, what's going on with his photography these days, what's going on with his channel, what's just, I had so many questions I wanted to speak to him about. And my interview style is much more like my videos. It's not polished, it's not corporate, it's not making sponsors happy. It's just a real conversation. That's kind of my concept when it comes to interviews. I just want to have a real, honest conversation with somebody. And it's like we forget the cameras there. Like, let's just have a real conversation between, man to man. And then there will be a video of that conversation, which I will upload. And I'm not going to clickbait it. I'm not going to try to spam it everywhere. I'm not going to try to convince you that this is going to, you should let me interview you because it's going to give you all this popularity. Like, no, I've got a very small channel, a very few views, a very, very niche audience. Maybe nobody will see it. But the idea is that it's just an honest heart-to-heart conversation, real conversation that's then uploaded later so that people who do see it may enjoy it. They might gain something from it. They might be able to benefit from this real conversation we had. And to my surprise, Jason actually responded to me, and he just basically said, you know, what do I want the interview to be about? Like, what sort of things do I want to talk about? And how do I want to do the interview? And my response to him was basically, you know, probably Zoom call or something is the easiest, most convenient. And I essentially broke down, like, you know, everything I've just said, you know, real conversation, real Jason Lanier, ask you some questions about how you got started with photography or your YouTube stuff, or, you know, maybe we could talk about the controversies, but if that's a sensitive subject, I can just avoid talking about that. You know, it's not supposed to be a gotcha video. And then he never responded to me. So I guess the concept of a real heart to heart either wasn't appealing, or because I mentioned the controversy stuff, maybe that's what kind of made him stay away. But looks like the Jason Lanier interview is not going to happen, which is too bad. I would theoretically love to talk to a lot of these guys, because you never see these YouTubers outside their channels. You never see them outside that element. You never get to hear from the real them. And that's the stuff I'm typically curious about. Like, yeah, this guy says he's a photographer, but does he, like, what does he really do? How much does he actually use these cameras? What is his approach to photography? Like, when he's giving us advice on camera choice or this or that, or lenses or anything else, like, is he coming from a financial standpoint, like, this is what you should do because this will be the most financially viable for a business? Or is he coming from an artistic standpoint, like, this is what's going to be the most meaningful or the most impactful? Like, that's the stuff I think about, and I assume other people could appreciate. But I've actually reached out to multiple YouTubers and been very polite and inquired about potentially interviewing them. And so far, they have all said no. Either they don't respond at all, or they give me a very rude response. Like, it's actually been shocking to me how rude. I'm not going to mention the names because, again, I'm not trying to bash anybody. But there are some very specific YouTubers that it was very eye-opening. Like, based on their response and their word choice and what they said to me, it was very, very eye-opening. Like, man, it seems like all you YouTubers, you really are just fake. Like, you're in real life, you're not a great person. You're not laid back. You're not cool. You don't just love meeting the people or the photographer. Like, this is a hustle for you. Like, you're only in it for trying to manipulate the game, right? Trying to make money. Like, that's the only aspect you care about. I think, what was it, the words that one guy said? He saw the number of subscribers on my channel, and because he has a bigger channel than me, he said something along the lines of, I really don't want to misquote him, but I also want to make sure I get his meaning out. Essentially, he told me outright that his time is better spent focusing on his own audience, because mine's not big enough to worry about, or mine's not big enough to focus on. Like, because I don't have a big channel and I can't send a lot of people his way, why the fuck does he care? He has no time for me. Maybe if I had a bigger channel, he would pretend to like me and he could smile in an interview, but no. My channel's not big enough. Go away, you know? And it's amazing how frequently I get responses like that. So, I don't know. I don't know if this is a new phenomenon, because now everybody wants to be a YouTuber or what, but that does seem to be the unfortunate state of society today, or of photography in general, or of YouTube photography. Nobody's satisfied with the gear they have. Everybody questions what they can or can't do. Everyone thinks they have to go into debt. nobody's getting good, genuine advice from these YouTubers they love so much. And it seems like behind the scenes, again, whether it was like old emails I was getting from Ken Wheeler, or it's directly being rejected today because I'm asking if I can talk to somebody, one way or another, uh, from one angle or another, it's a very cutthroat landscape. People are just, it's, all about number one, that kind of thing. So anyway, that's what I've got. I I shot a wedding recently for relatives. That was an interesting experience. Story for a different day. I will be teaching 2 or 3 different photography classes in a school up in Taipei in the next couple weeks, which I'm excited about that. Bringing the concept and of photography and all that to students up there. But again, story for a different day. I'll let you know how it goes. But anyway, this video has been long enough. As usual, I thank you for watching, and until next time, I will talk to you later.